And now to introduce the Belonging Economies track. It is my extreme pleasure to bring to the stage the wonderful and brilliant Dr. Hossein Ayazi to the stage. Hossein is a, yes, okay, come on. Come on, we can get a little bit more of that. Whoop, whoop. Whoop, whoop. Yes. Hossein is a senior policy analyst with the Othering and Belonging Institute, and his research expertise and published work spans the global political economy of race, food systems, and climate. And I have to say, Hossein is one of the kindest people I've ever met. Please welcome to the stage, Hossein. Come take it away, my brother.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you all for being here. Hello, everyone. My name is Hossein Ayazi, and I'm one of the organizers of this conference. I'm here on stage to introduce the second track, or thematic area, in this conference, Belonging Economies, following my colleague yesterday, Ashley Gallegos, who introduced the first track, Places of Belonging. One way to introduce this track is by defining belonging economies. Yet, in short, we're actually here to co-create the definition and practice of belonging economies together, doing so in ways that are grounded in the principles and practices of belonging generally: inclusion, connection, recognition, and agency, expressed as the co-creation of a just, equitable, and life-giving world. The rationale here is clear. We as an institute, and so many of us here, center these principles and related principles in our work across housing, transportation, land, food, governance, finance, labor, industry, and so on. And now, as always, we're tasked with exploring how and why these principles and practices must be the basis of our economic relations, rather than accumulation, extraction, and exclusion. We know that things have gotten much worse since the 1970s and 80s, when neoliberalism emerged and promoted unconstrained markets and state-backed privatization at the expense of our collective well-being, consciousness, and future. But accumulation, extraction, and exclusion have long been the basis of dominant economic relations, including, as we know, through means that have been perfectly legal. So in this moment, we might look to the work that has come before us and that remains evergreen, including work that has taken place here in this very space that we are. For example, Martin Luther King Jr., as you may know, spoke here in 1962 at what was then known as the Oakland Civic Auditorium. It was in March 1965 that King first publicly stated his anti-war position, declaring that, quote, "Millions of dollars can be spent every day to hold troops in South Vietnam, and our country cannot protect the rights of Black people in Selma." End quote. In 1967, King highlighted Vietnam's devastation at the hands of, quote, "deadly Western arrogance," noting that, quote, "We are on the side of the wealthy and the secure while we create a hell for the poor at home and abroad," end quote. At the same time, and after MLK's assassination, it was MLK's wife, the great Coretta Scott King, who continued to connect their anti-war position to the rights, well-being, and liberation of the poor and racialized, seeing political enfranchisement as but a first step. In line with the broader Black freedom movement, Coretta Scott King advocated for a universal basic income and guaranteed jobs at living wage. And this was alongside efforts to demand an end to war in Vietnam and divest from South African apartheid. In other words, economies organized around meeting collective needs and thus delinked from our physical capacity to labor and delinked from domination and exploitation of peoples and lands at home and abroad. In other words, belonging without othering. I bring these up to highlight long-standing efforts to define and create more just, equitable, life-giving economies, efforts that are at once local and global and interconnected. efforts that grapple with the history and present nature of structural injustice, and that are attuned to the circumstances and possibilities of the moment. Our task at this conference, across the Belonging Economies track, across all 3 tracks, and across the conference as a whole, is to explore how and where such work is taking place, explore how and where we can extend, connect, and strengthen such work, and explore what the term belonging economies affords among many such efforts to democratize economic decision-making and expand people's capacity for self-determination and access to a good life. Efforts under the name of regenerative economies, restorative economies, abolition, climate justice, land back, and so on. Touchstones of this conference track include Dr. Ruth Wilson Gilmore's talk yesterday, Astra Taylor's upcoming talk on solidarity, democracy, and debt, as well as the upcoming panel, Building Belonging Economies, which will center questions of repair and reparations. Finally, there are breakout sessions today and tomorrow that elaborate upon this work in areas such as finance and community governance and resilience. We hope these questions, invitations, and conversations are of value to you, and we thank you so much for being here. Now, it is my great pleasure to say a few words about the great Astra Taylor before welcoming her to the stage. Astra is a documentary filmmaker, a musician, and a longtime organizer, having been deeply involved in the Occupy Wall Street movement and having co-founded the Debt Collective. This is the first union of debtors which seeks to abolish debt and advocate for a transformation in the distribution of public goods and services. Astra is also a prolific author of several books, including most recently, Solidarity, the Past, Present, and Future of a World-Changing Idea, co-authored with Leah Hunt Hendricks. Please help me in welcoming to the stage Astra Taylor. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. What an honor to be here. I just want to see this beautiful space and all of you. Thank you for being here. I didn't quite know what I was getting into. Amazing. My name is Astra, and I do have some slides that I'd like to call up. So I was assigned the task of speaking for 20 minutes about solidarity, democracy, and debt. I've written books on each of these topics, so I'm going to try to distill some of this stuff. Slide, please. I just want to begin with this quote, one of my favorite quotes from the great Robin D.G. Kelley. Social movements generate new knowledge, new theories, new questions. The most radical ideas often grow out of a concrete intellectual engagement with the problems of aggrieved populations confronting systems of oppression. And I just want to hold this because so much of the writing and intellectual work I do is actually rooted in my organizing. And I really reject the distinction between theory and practice, this idea that there are thinkers, the people with the big ideas, and then the doers, like the muscle. So much of what we know about democracy, about solidarity, about debt comes from the grassroots. Slide. So we've already mentioned that I was part of the Occupy Wall Street movement. This is actually where my engagement with these ideas really began in 2011. And this is the one photo I have of myself at Occupy. I'm in the blue shirt the first day before the tents came out. And we sat in circles, and what we did was we talked about why we were there. And it began this incredible learning process. And of course, I'm thinking about Occupy and the experience I had there is there are all of these incredible encampments across the country right now with these students. And I'm just so full of love and admiration and awe for the students and for the faculty standing in solidarity with them. And I'm thinking about how much learning is happening right now. in the context of this massive anti-democratic attack on higher education, on public education, as well as this genocidal war. So I just want to think about that. Slide, please. So 2011, I'm going to give a bit of a history of the debt collective, very fast here. 2011, Occupy Wall Street. We came together under the banner, "You are not alone." And we had a protest marking one T-Day, the day student debt surpassed $1 trillion. And we demanded the abolition of all student debt and free education for all. And right now, I just want to hang on that word freedom. I just want to say one thing, which is we mean free as in price, free as in free aimed at liberation, free as in free from cops who will arrest you for protesting. We mean freedom in all of those facets. Slide. So this is what the press said to us. And I hold a grudge. Reuters. They said they want all student debt in the country forgiven, all $1 trillion of it. And if the government would be so kind, they'd appreciate it if they would pay for higher education from here on out. What has happened to this proposal? Nothing. NPR, most experts believe there's little chance the government would ever forgive student loans. Slide. So we didn't listen to them. We just kept trying to figure out how to organize. What should we do next? We're just normal people without a lot of power and a whole lot of debt. So we figured out how to buy and erase people's debts. And this is something that we first started doing in 2012. We've erased hundreds of millions of dollars of medical debts, probation debt, payday loans. Just last year, we erased $10 million for Morehouse College students. But we knew that we couldn't buy and erase all the odious debt, that we had to build power and make the government cancel it. Slide. So one of the portfolios of debt we bought belonged to, it was tuition debt for a predatory for-profit college called Corinthian Colleges, kind of like University of Phoenix, these predatory for-profit chains. And we said, if we want to erase all of your loans, what we need to do is organize. And we organized the world's first debt strike. The Corinthian 15, they eventually grew into thousands. Other schools joined them. But they basically said, we can't pay, we won't pay. We're entitled to education, we're entitled to debt relief. Slide. And they said, we owe you nothing. We're owed. We're owed an education. Slide. So they started making waves, we started making allies. Slide. Slide. We kept fighting. We got the Obama administration to start administering a trickle of relief using different strategies. Then, of course, Donald Trump took the office. Betsy DeVos was Secretary of Education. And we even forced her to cancel student debt. She signed it with a note, with extreme displeasure. And we did this by using every tool that we could. We used legal strategies, we lobbied the government, we engaged in economic disobedience, we changed the narrative around student debt. Slide. We just have to savor that. Slide. 2022, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have a press conference. And after 7 years, our demand from day one was finally met. Every Corinthian got their debts canceled. This was 600,000 people, and more for-profit students have seen their debts canceled. And of course, we won a commitment from the president to cancel student debt for almost everybody. Not all of it, not enough. There were some complications with the Supreme Court that you might have heard about. But we're still fighting because we know that they're not doing it out of the goodness of their heart, right? They're doing it because people organized. Slide. Sorry, slide. This is a graph I just got yesterday, and I had to throw it in here. We're bending the curve on student debt. Even with the obstacles. And we're not going to stop. Slide. So how do we do this, right? By building solidarity. That's really what it is, by organizing and building solidarity. And I didn't realize that solidarity was such an important thing until I started organizing. Slide. Alone our debts are a burden, together they make us powerful. It's all about finding our unexpected commonalities. I mean, we have to remember that when we started organizing, it is not as though student debtors saw themselves as having anything in common, right? People thought, well, I went to Corinthian colleges and you went to, I don't know, the University of Iowa and you went to Hampshire. We had to work to help people see themselves as connected. And we do this by the words debtors assembly flash on there briefly. Again, we have strategies, legal tools, policy concepts, but it really does begin with conversations because debt is something that's shrouded in shame and stigma. And so we host and rehost and host again things called debtors assemblies that are inspired by the feminist consciousness raising circles of the 1970s, where people speak about their financial burdens and they see what they have in common with others. Now, despite our organizing, the fact is that student debt and household debt indebtedness have just gone up. We're actually closer to 2T Day than we were when we began this organizing. And right now, household indebtedness exceeds 17 trillion. Why? Here's one of our many slogans. We are not in debt because we live beyond our means, but because we are denied the means to live. Household indebtedness is a symptom of the fact that people are paid poverty wages on the job, the erosion of public goods and services, the privatization of education, healthcare, and housing, which should be democratic and social rights, not speculative assets. And so that is why we have to couple the demand for debt abolition with a rebuilding and restructuring of our entire economy. Slide. So we increasingly, and this is an old story, but it intensified under neoliberalism. So in the 80s, we increasingly have to individually debt finance, which should be democratic public goods. And this has very pernicious effects. This amplifies pre-existing inequalities, and it enriches the owning class who use debt as a kind of wealth transfer, right? Fees and interest accumulate to the 1%. So we have increasing wealth and power on one side, increasing indebtedness on the other. So, our debts, and this is a key insight, our debts are somebody else's assets. They are on the balance sheets of companies and increasingly the government. Slide. So just quickly, the Debt Collective, we're known for our work on student debt. That's where we've made the biggest impact. But we also organize around medical debt. 100 million people have it. We see huge potential for building solidarity here across unexpected differences. Of course, this debt is not held equally. It's disproportionately held by Black communities. Women hold more debt than men. Slide. But it's an astonishing burden, and much of this debt is actually hidden. It's on credit cards, right? Because people are paying for healthcare with the swipe of a plastic card. Slide. Rent debt is also something we are working on lately. There's billions of dollars in back rent debt, crushing families, and rents are too damn high and getting higher. And we need to put social housing on the agenda as the solution to this. Slide. In California, we do have an important tool, the Tenant Power Toolkit, that you can use to fight an eviction if you get an unlawful detainer notice. We've helped about 20,000 households with this tool. It's almost like an automated lawyer, but please do pass the word about this since we are in California. Slide. Okay, so debt. Why debt? We're not just obsessed with debt. We're interested in debt because it ties to these other things: democracy, solidarity. For too long, debt has been a tool of profit-making, social control, and racial domination. Slide. That is Thomas Jefferson. It's a drawing from a collaboration I did with the artist Molly Crabapple called Your Debt is Someone Else's Asset. It's a 7-minute animation. In 1803, Thomas Jefferson wrote to the governor of Indiana and said that it would be good to drive indigenous communities into debt so that they could be severed more easily from their land. And this was a shockingly common practice across North America. The use of debt to further settler colonialism. And in fact, mortgages, as we now know them, evolved into the form that they now take because once they came to what is now the United States, they were used as a tool to dispossess debtors from their land, from their territory. Slide. This kind of spirit continues into the present day. I mean, there's so many examples of this, right? Yeah, this one's, what was so interesting about the fight over student debt cancellation is the gloves came off and they finally told us the truth. They're like, we can't cancel your debt. Who's going to sign up to join the military? Some of the right-wing lawsuits said, you can't cancel the debt. Nobody's going to work for us anymore if we can't hold the promise of public service loan forgiveness over their head. Slide. And this was an interesting headline from the last few months. Debt also functions in this way at the sovereign level as a tool of control over entire countries. So many poor countries now have to prioritize paying back creditors instead of providing essential goods and services. And so there was a discussion of lording over Egypt. It's the fact that it is in a perpetual debt crisis in order to accelerate the dispossession of Palestinians. Slide. So of course, I'm skipping over a lot. We can think of sharecropping, redlining, all the ways that debt has been used to advance domination. And so it's against that backdrop that debtor organizing comes into focus. Debtor organizing is a matter of economic justice, right? Because it gets to the heart of this extra form of wealth extraction. It speaks to racial justice. There's been a lot of research that showed canceling student debt is actually an incredibly efficient way of narrowing the racial wealth gap. It's a matter of gender justice because women, and this holds for communities of color as well, have a harder time paying back their debts because of wage discrimination on the job. Debtor organizing is a matter of labor justice because we are essentially robbed twice. Ooh, a bird. Hopefully it can find freedom. It's a matter of labor organizing because, if people weren't people are robbed twice. You're robbed by your employer and then you're robbed by the creditor who lends to you. It's a matter of ecological justice because debt is offered at interest, so it locks our economy into endless growth. We're saying we have more tomorrow to pay back than we have today. And it's a matter of democracy because debt has a way of subverting democratic priorities, right? We have to pay our creditors back before we can invest in the things we need to survive and thrive. Slide. Okay, and debtor organizing is a way of building power. Slide. This is John Paul Getty, the industrialist, and we take some inspiration from him. He said, if you owe the bank $100, that's your problem. But if you owe the bank $100 million, that's the bank's problem. And our insight is that together we own the bank, right? That we are actually collectively too big to fail. Slide. So a little bit about solidarity to wrap it up really quick. I just finished this book. I co-wrote it with a friend, Leah Hunt Hendricks, who I met at Occupy Wall Street. And she convinced me to write this book because she said, Astra, I've been meaning to tell you, but the word solidarity, the word, not the practice, because I'm sure the practice is ancient, but the word that we use goes back to debt. It comes from ancient Roman law, where there's the idea of debts held in common, obligatio in solidum. And I found this so moving, this idea that actually there's a material basis to solidarity, right? It's not a fuzzy feeling or an affect. It speaks to our indebtedness, the idea of being on the hook for each other. Slide. And so I used the word solidarity just like we often do in movements, right? As a slogan, something that I shouted out, signed my emails, in solidarity. But I had never really given its due. And in fact, I had just written a book on democracy, made a film about democracy. And solidarity was something I just kind of put in the conclusion, as a kind of nice buzzword. And it was in this project, through this project that I really started thinking about, well, what is solidarity? And, it turned out that it actually had been the focus of all of these years of organizing. So solidarity, I've come to see, is really as essential to democracy as its cousins, as equality, as justice, as freedom, these words that we use all the time, but it's far less discussed. And I think it makes sense, actually, that in the United States, at least specifically, that solidarity, which is a relational concept, it's about the bonds between us, would get kind of short shrift. Solidarity is also a messy concept. It's engaged, it takes a side, and so maybe it's a little bit, more uncomfortable for academics, for people who like their concepts a bit more pristine. Next. It's important, I think, to say, too, that solidarity isn't always good. It can come in as a reactionary form. We're focused on what we call transformative solidarity, which is not identity or unity. It bridges across difference. It's more akin to wholeness than oneness, right? So early theorists of solidarity use the analogy of the human body. We have knees, feet, spleens, brains, eyes, but it comes together as this whole. It's heterogeneous, but it's not. It's all these different parts coming together. But unlike a human body, in society, solidarity has to be made. It's generated. It's organized into being. Slide. There are sort of two traditions of solidarity that we draw on. One is the fighting spirit of the labor movement, which emphasizes conflict and change, class consciousness. We need this. Slide. And then there's other interesting, so of course the labor movement gave solidarity the heft that we know it has, right? But there's this other tradition in France that we don't think about as much here, exemplified by Emile Durkheim, the sociologist you might have read about in college. And he and a group of thinkers were actually called the solidarists. And their theory of solidarity emphasized cohesion. They asked what would hold society together in a time of industrial upheaval, the decline of religion, sort of all this tumult, a time not unlike ours. And they decided solidarity might hold some of the key. And they picked up that idea from ancient Roman law of solidarity being a debt held in common and took that metaphor and really ran with it and started asking, what do we owe each other? So I'm going to skip a few slides. Slide. So actually, maybe because Martin Luther King was mentioned, there's a real resonance with this amazing quote that I'll just read the first part. This is from Martin Luther King. Whether we realize it or not, each of us is eternally in the red. We are everlasting debtors to known and unknown men and women. We do not finish breakfast without being dependent on more than half of the world. And this is the thing. The Debt Collective has been kind of, gesturing towards this from the beginning. There are just debts, there are unjust debts. There are debts we want to refuse and abolish, and there are debts that we want to pay, that democracy demands that we pay, because we are interdependent. And one way we pay those debts is through solidarity, through that world-shaking and world-making practice of coming together across our differences to fight for social change. Slide. So not all debts are unjust. Slide. Solidarity, though, right, is under attack, this way of paying debts forward. Decades of market-friendly policies have undermined solidarity in ways that are subtle, just by a culture of consumerism, competition, and overt. And we're seeing this right now as protesters are arrested and beaten, as bail funds are criminalized, as providing abortion care is criminalized. And against this backdrop, and I want to end here, engaging in solidarity and figuring out how to pay these debts forward is more essential than ever. So thank you so much. It's an honor to be speaking to you today. And the last thing is, as an organizer, I have to say, please do join the Debt Collective, www.debtcollective.org. You always have to make the ask. And we need to build a world that can counteract this horrible and terrifying backlash that is mounting right now in response to the powerful social movements of the last decade. Thank you.